Our next speaker is Margaret Morton. Britain Margaret Morton moved to Waterford more than 50 years ago when she and her historic preservationist husband, W. Brown Morton III, together they raised their 3 children. Now a senior writer with Loudoun Now, Morton embraced a journalistic career 25 years ago, covering the people, places, and institutions of Western Loudoun. She first caught the storytelling bug as a 10-year-old at boarding school in England. Lights Out was the signal for the 10 girls in her dormitory to tell stories, each vying to outdo her bedmate in lurid flights of fancy. Whoa. It's a passion that never waned. Please welcome Margaret Morton.
All right, we're going to try this. Can you hear me at the back? Good. Okay, because I like to move around a little bit. First of all, I would like to say, that so everybody doesn't think that I've been in the beer too much, if you hear me stuttering a little bit, stammering, it's the aftermath of a stroke that I had a year and a half ago, and I'm nearly almost better, but not completely. Whoops. Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. So anyway, if I stammer and stutter a little bit, don't worry, just think that you're playing charades, and you will have to work out what I'm trying to say. Okay? All right. I decided I wanted to talk about World War II also, because they say that your earliest memories are sometimes the sharpest. And at the ripe old age of 81, I can say that that is correct. Those memories of growing up as a child in England are still with me, absolutely clearly. It starts with sounds. There are some sounds that I hear today that still strike fear into me. The wail of an air raid siren, that's one of them. Or the whoomp of a bomb hitting the ground. And the worst was the heavy, menacing sound of German bombers overhead. And that, until I die, I'll hear those sounds. And then there were impressions. My father, who was the craziest and most eccentric man I've ever met in my life, he was an inventor. And his idea of a bomb shelter was really interesting. We would be, as a young child, you'd wake up very sleepily. You'd have to put on one of those awful, smelly, nasty gas masks, rubber, and they pulled at the hairs on your head when you were fitted out with them. Then you went downstairs to his wonderful bomb shelter. Now, he liked to cure his bacon, his own bacon. And you're a child of 4 years old, and there are these pigs hanging from a big beam in the cellar on hooks. And they were brined, and their ribs and their tail, it was disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And you had to push through them to get to the shelter. It was pretty nasty. But for all that, there was a lot of camaraderie, a lot of fun. And for my parents, towards the middle of the war, when America became involved in the war, we had an American colonel and his corporal billeted on us in the house. Well, my mother loved him, mainly because of the delicacies that he brought her from the PX and that we couldn't get in England. And she loved chocolates. So he would bring her all kinds of wonderful things that she would really love. And then I fell in love with the corporal, who I called Joe. I didn't know about G.I. Joes. I just thought his name was Joe. And my brother and I were nearly killed middle way through the war, not by the Germans, by my mother. We were sick for some reason. So we were put into our parents' bedroom, and I found a 5-pound box of Cadbury's chocolate. She'd hidden it up above in her cupboard, and I found it. We ate every single last one of them, and then we were sick, British style, which means that we threw up all over her bed. I think she came very close to killing us. My strongest memories, though, of that time is of an Austrian POW who was billeted on us at the end of the war. He was very sad, and he was pining to get home. I knew he had a little daughter, about 5, like my age. I knew that. And one day, he presented to me with a great deal of pride, a beautiful carved wooden cuckoo clock that he had made for me and gave to me. But you know, even then, in that way, the children they really know real truth. And deep down, I knew it wasn't for me. He carved it for the daughter that he might never see again. Fast forward, almost 20 years later, I worked in the television world in London. And I was working for one of the legendary aces of the RAF. At 24 years old, cocky Hugh Dundas was the youngest group captain in the RAF. He had also flown with the equally legendary ace, Douglas Bader, who I don't know whether you know of him or not, but he had lost his legs before the war and still was flying. And he was taken prisoner in Germany, and the only way that the Germans could get him to stop trying to escape was to confiscate his legs, his tin legs. They took him away. And I remember in those years afterwards, when I was working for Cocky, the very first time he talked to me, he came into my room and he said, and this was the first thing that he said to me. He said, "Oh, did you know that old so-and-so went to the cleaners last night?" And I looked at him. I thought, is this man mad? I thought, who's old so-and-so? And why the hell was he at the cleaners last night? And then I realized it was the typical RAF, the way you kept danger when you were shot at every single day that you went up. You overlaid it with a whole huge swath of humor to keep the darkness away. And I remember we became very good friends. And then Cocky and his wife would invite me down weekends. And one weekend he said, well, I'm going to have, somebody else is going to pick you up, and she'll bring you down, and, you'll like her, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, she picked me up. We both lived in London, a rather nice part of London. And I got in the car, this bored, blasé, heavily made-up woman in her early 40s. And I thought to myself, what the hell am I going to talk about with this woman for an hour and a half in a car before I get to my destination? We have nothing in common. And it was very difficult. And then all of a sudden, she came alive. She had been in the war, like Pocky. Turned out that she had been one of Churchill's little girls. You've all seen those old war movies where the girls are there and they're pushing long queues to pull in a ship that was sunk or a plane that had been downed, and that was their job. Well, she was one of his little girls. And I never would have known this. And she became very animated, and we managed to pass an hour and a half very, very easily. But then she said she ended it on a note of pathos. She said to me, and I thought it was the saddest thing I'd ever heard in my life. She said to me, I don't think I've ever been alive since then.